Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Excited to have you all for one of our monthly City Hall check-ins. This month, we are honored to be joined by the Assessor-Recorder Joaquín Torres. Before I pass it over to the assessor to give his presentation, I would like to offer a very large thank you to our title sponsor, Waymo. Waymo does have a short little video that we're excited to share with you so you can learn a little bit more about who Waymo is and the great work that they do.
Say hello to Waymo, the world's most experienced driver. The Waymo driver is what we call our self-driving technology. It has over a decade of real-world experience and has driven millions of miles. With Waymo One, we can make it safer and easier for you to get around, so you can spend more time doing what you love. And with Waymo Via, the same driver with the same deep experience can also deliver your packages or save you a trip to the dry cleaners. Or if you run a business, Waymo Via can help you transport whatever you need, making sure shipments arrive right when they're supposed to. This is the Waymo driver, a driver that's reimagining transportation for all of us.
Wonderful. Again, thank you, Waymo. And now I am honored to introduce our Assessor-Recorder, Joaquín Torres. A brief bio for Joaquín. He was sworn in as San Francisco's Assessor-Recorder by Mayor London Breed on February 8th, 2021. Prior to his appointment, Torres served as the director of the San Francisco Office of Economic and Workforce Development since 2018 and has led citywide efforts to mitigate economic hardships on businesses and workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. Torres is also the president of the San Francisco Housing Authority Commission, and previously he has served as director of the San Francisco Invest in Neighborhoods Initiative, director of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services, and liaison to the San Francisco Latino and American Indian communities and the supervisorial districts 9 and 11. He is the current participant in the Government Alliance for Racial Equity program and serves as chair of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee for the American Conservatory Theater, or ACT. With that, I'm honored to pass it over to the assessor, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Emily, for having me, and a huge thanks to all of the members of the Chamber who provided such support to the city during an extraordinarily difficult year for our city, and your support of Rodney Fong and his leadership as part of the Economic Recovery Task Force, whose fruits are beginning to be shown through announcements that are being made very recently as the mayor begins to prepare her final recommendations for a budget that will be introduced to the Board of Supervisors on June 1st. From the arts, from cultural vitality, to workers, to small businesses, to our downtown core, we know that every aspect that is important for our souls and creative and cultural economic vibrancy for San Francisco requires very strategic investments, especially right now, but we're very grateful for the investments that both the state and the federal government have been making to help us achieve those ends. As Emily mentioned, my name is Joaquín Torres, and I'm the Assessor-Recorder for the City and County of San Francisco. I had the honor of serving as Mayor Breed's Director of Economic and Workforce Development throughout this difficult year, and also being a member, together with the leadership of my predecessor, Carmen Chu, Rodney Fong, Rudy Gonzalez from the Labor Council, and Treasurer Jose Cisneros to support our Economic Recovery Task Force efforts. May we bring up the slides, please? Great. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the indicators that can shed some light on where we are as a city and an outlook on our economy. Some of the current transfer tax numbers to give you an overview there. Some very brief highlights of some of the recovery efforts that I just mentioned at the federal, state, and city level. And of course, how our office is taking part in reopening up City Hall and being a resource for you as members of the public, as organizations and as individuals. Next slide, please. So before the pandemic, we had a record low unemployment rate of 1.9% back in December of 2019. And as all of us remember, there was a very sharp increase, in the, one second, please. Great, a very sharp increase in those unemployment numbers, where we were seeing about 12.6% in April of 2020 of last year. The largest losses that we're seeing, as we all remember, were in leisure and hospitality, where half of the jobs went away between February and April. And San Francisco lost 4 out of 5 bar jobs, 2 out of 3 restaurant jobs. Now, 1 year later, between March 2021 and April 2021, the total number of jobs in the San Francisco, Redwood City, South San Francisco area, which includes us and San Mateo, we've seen has increased by 15,000 jobs. So we're starting to see some momentum again, especially in alignment with some of the reopening efforts that all of us are breathing in with a sigh of relief. As of April, the unemployment rate is now 5.4% in San Francisco. An important element to point out here, though, is that as we were seeing even in the best of times with that 1.9% unemployment rate, the rate of unemployment in the Black community was 3 times higher. The rate of unemployment in the Latinx and API communities, 2 to 2.5 times higher. So the disparities, even in the best of times, still exist. The disparities that have been revealed throughout the pandemic remain important for us to focus on, and I know that that is imperative for Mayor Breed as she seeks to make investments to benefit our communities. When we look at leisure and hospitality, we were up about 8,900 jobs. That registered some of the largest growth that we've seen to date. The improvement was in food services, drinking places, establishments, bars, arts and entertainment, and recreation and accommodation. A year ago in early 2020, according to Zillow, the San Francisco median home value was $1.4 million. Median rent value was a little over $4,200. A year later, we're seeing a demand for single-family homes continue to drive prices in the entire region. In San Francisco, we're seeing the average sales price of a single-family home at $1.7 million. That's a 9% increase from the previous year. So again, still remembering that there are some dynamics that are still moving in that direction, while other areas may be impacted, most specifically condominiums. From the commercial real estate side, before the pandemic, the office vacancy rate was at a low 5.6%. That spiked to 16.7% at the end of last year of 2020, the highest level since 2005. Those data points come from Cushman & Wakefield. There's now about 8.4 million square feet of office space available for sublease. That's a record high amount. But some of the bright spots that we're seeing right now is that that inventory is driving some rent decreases for affordability purpose for nonprofits and others seeking office space. And the demand from office tenants looking for office spaces has increased in recent months that we're seeing as well. And while we're experiencing some dip in the lease rates, there are businesses and nonprofit organizations, as I mentioned, that have been priced out in the past that are now looking to occupy office space in San Francisco. As Ted Egan has mentioned in some of his presentations, a lot of supply relative to demand, but we're starting to move in a direction of equilibrium, and that is a sign of normal market adjustment taking place. On the city side, from the city budget perspective, we had a shortfall in November of last year of about $115 million. We were projecting that shortfall in the city's general fund. That was due to decreases in key tax and business fee revenues from sales, hotel, and business taxes. The city offset the decrease with available fund balance and reserves from the prior year. Now in February of this year, we saw a $241 million increase so that we were able to realize about $125 million surplus. So on the good side, we thought we were going to be in a very, very difficult place, but we did see increases where there was a surplus to kind of move us through this very difficult time. We're able to avoid many cuts. We're able to avoid many layoffs. Some of the federal and state legislative and regulatory actions were some of the key drivers that have benefited the city. Most recently, you saw a $90 million investment that we're making in eviction protection to support those who have not been able to pay rent in partnership with the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. That is in partnership, of course, with the federal government. And that is something that we are very, very lucky to be experiencing here in San Francisco. In April, the last of the three ordinances that appropriated the $125 million in property tax revenue for pandemic relief purposes was approved. The uses, as evidenced in the Comptroller's report earlier this year, about $28 million for business registration fee waivers, $24 million for small business relief, $24 million to support arts and entertainment organizations, additional dollars for rent relief and housing stability, $17 million for youth learning initiatives, overdose prevention programs supported, family relief funds being supported, and urgent needs within our communities as well through that surplus. In May, we saw an additional $157 million surplus. Higher than expected property tax revenue supported that. Increased federal reimbursement and lower expenses contributed to that surplus and those increases. Those came from one-time excess ERAF dollars, around $83 million, and of course an increase in stability of transfer tax revenue. So that is a very, very bright spot for us. Some of the other indicators that we're looking at that give us a sign of hope looking to the future, we saw 77% of San Franciscans 16 and older have received at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. 66% of San Franciscans 16 and older have completed their vaccine series. So either the Johnson & Johnson single dose or both doses for 66% of the population here in San Francisco. For seniors, our most vulnerable community members, 89% have received their first dose, 78% have completed that vaccine series. Next slide, please. So just some general background in terms of our office's role and our function. The background for us in terms of our assessor division and then of course our recorder division. We're responsible for maintaining some very important stability and security here in the city financially through the assessment of and location of 211,000 parcels throughout the city and county. We see assessed value nearing $300 billion. So on average, we're seeing about $3 billion being contributed to the city's general fund, in addition to supporting school district, as well as BART at a very small 1% amount of that revenue that's coming in. To put that in a little bit of perspective for you, last year, the budget was $13.6 billion. We helped provide through our work $3 billion of those dollars. That's important for our emergency response system, for our city workers, for our parks, for our schools, and for transportation. So we're very proud of the work that we're able to do through our office. We've seen tax revenue increase with new construction, and that has been a very big benefit for us to make sure that we're contributing to the city's general fund to provide these services, especially during a time of such difficulty. We have seen some positive growth, but we are projecting that it may be a bit slower than previous years due to some of the decreases in sales and the lower level of new construction in 2020. Then on the recorder side, of course, as many of you know, or your colleagues know, we are still recording real estate transactions, deed of trusts, liens related to documents, our mortgages, public documents, power of attorney. And what we're looking forward to when some of the first appointments are made on the week of June 7th, marriages. We're looking forward to opening up our doors without appointment for the general public beginning the week of June 7th. However, our staff has been there throughout the pandemic, making sure that we could provide city services to those who needed it most specifically in relationship to the complications and confusion around Prop 19, which was passed by the voters in November of last year. Last year, we collected approximately $335 million in transfer tax. That's important because some of our existing audit programs we were able to leverage was able to identify nearly $70 million in underreported net revenue. And again, without those programs still being operationalized, we would be missing out on those funds. To put that in perspective, that could pay 3 times over some of the investments that we made to support some of our most vulnerable communities with economic relief, with testing opportunities, and also a model through community partnerships that made those programs successful and that are realizing those positive numbers increasing in the communities that need our support and attention the most. Next slide, please. So for the next few slides, I just want to share some of the transfer tax data that our office has been collecting. Many people have been asking me in some of my presentations whether we're seeing a drop in the activity in the real estate market, and the transfer tax provides a very unique window to the trends that we're noticing. So it's very volatile. It depends on several factors, including investor interest, economic cycles, interest rates, property values, and credit availability. Transfer tax, again, is a one-time fee that we collect during transactions, calculated applying a very specific tax rate to the value of the sales price. Now, as this chart shows you here, our transfer tax transactions are almost to fiscal year 18-19 levels, and we're only halfway through the year. Last fiscal year, there were over 7,400 transactions. As of the end of April 30th, there were over 7,800 transfer tax transactions. So what we're not seeing right now is a significant slowdown as we may have expected during this time, and that is a very good thing again for the city and county. Next slide, please. So what we're excited about is that those collection dollars are significantly ahead of what the city had budgeted, which is what you had seen here in the black line. To the left, you can see the last 2 fiscal years and the revenue totals there. The cumulative amount of the transfer tax revenue of $325 million, which is about equal to last year's total amount of $335. So we're seeing a lot of high value transactions, some of which you've seen in the press, whether in the Chronicle or the Business Times, that have provided us with some of the additional revenues. The number of high value transactions has been small, but it's still generating quite a bit of that transfer tax revenue that we're seeing. Next slide, please. So here's another way to break this down. This chart is showing the different tax tiers based on transactions and their amounts, and the total amount of revenue collected by each tier. Tier 6, which reflects transactions over $25 million, generated about $160 million, representing about 55% of all of the transfer tax revenue that we're seeing. That's coming from 30 transactions. Compare this with Tier 3, which are transactions between $1 million to $5 million. Those are mainly residential homes, and they were over 5,100 transactions that have generated $70 million of the transfer tax revenue that we're seeing. So again, those high value transactions are very much contributing to the increased revenue. As I mentioned before, in March of this year, as many of you might have seen, that $1 billion Dropbox headquarters sales transaction that broke records for the highest monthly transfer tax revenue that we've seen from that transaction. In addition, of course, to the Prop I passage, which has doubled the amount of transfer tax for these higher level transactions, those are also contributing to the increased revenue that we're seeing as well. Next slide, please. So as you can see, just a bit of a historical view here for transfer tax. We collected the lowest amount in the past 15 years back in 2008. And then in 2021, we're projected to be about $326 million, which is $188 million above the original budgeted amount by the Comptroller's Office. 8.2 million below prior year actual revenues received. Again, this is due to higher than anticipated from the Comptroller's Office perspective, levels of commercial real estate activity, and the passage, again, as I mentioned, of Prop I back in November of 2020, which has increased tax rates for transactions over that $10 million amount. Next slide, please. I think all of us have been very, very comforted by the consistency that we're seeing from the federal government and the way in which messaging is being clearly shared with us around what the priorities are going to be from the Biden-Harris administration and their associated departments that benefit our needs here in San Francisco. and are definitely helping us navigate as a city and county the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. I still remain committed as in my new role as the assessor, doing everything I can to support our businesses and property owners to successfully access the variety of programs that are out there. I know it can be very, very confusing, and we're doing our best as a city to coordinate all of those resources, whether they're local resources, state resources, federal resources, in partnership with community-based partners, to make sure that people have access to that information so they know where help is, and also, more importantly, how they can access it, and that, yes, it may be worth the trouble to go through from a paperwork perspective, bureaucracy perspective, or simply asking a question perspective to gain access to those resources. Small businesses have received over $4.1 billion in federal loan and grant programs to support over 37,000 small businesses. That has been through the COVID Payroll Protection Program loan program, in addition to some of their economic injury disaster loans at a very low interest rate for them. In addition to that, we finally saw movement with the Federal Restaurant Fund. We heard our Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, convene a town hall in the past couple of weeks to share that this program is providing $28.6 billion for the owners of restaurants, food trucks, catering services, bakeries, and bars. Next slide, please. From the California state relief perspective, we have seen the state benefit from additional reserves that they were not anticipating as well, that are coming at the most opportune times for us. We know back in November of last year, the creation of a $500 million COVID relief grant that was administered up and down the state by the small business advocate, who now is leading the SBA for the country right now, Isabel Guzman. We're very lucky that we have a very strong relationship with her here in the city and county of San Francisco and in California that have been benefiting our small businesses. And we're seeing the fruits of that being borne out through the programs that they have been announcing that are also supporting our California approach as well. 40,000 small businesses and nonprofits received approximately $500 million in those grant funds. And then most recently in 2021, in February, the legislature and the Newsom administration quadrupled the funds available for California small businesses through their grant relief program, up to $2 billion. In May, he announced his plan to expand that grant to $4 billion. That represents one of the largest programs, I think the largest program for that kind of small business relief in the country here in California. In addition, you saw the small business tax cut. Recently signed AB 80 to give small businesses in total $6.2 billion in tax relief. That forgives PPP loans that businesses received from the federal government during the pandemic that will not be counted as taxable income, so that those businesses can benefit from the full relief that they were intended for them during this time through no fault of their own, based on the restrictions that supported all of us and our public health approach to recovery here in California and, of course, in our region and in San Francisco. And these businesses can also deduct the cost of those expenses for what those loans paid for. Next slide, please. Then the next layer, again, federal government, state government, city government, all of them working very closely together right now to ensure that we're supporting our economic vitality and cultural vitality here here and up and down the state and in the city. During the past year, under Mayor Leeds' leadership, we have been hustling to deploy and give out those grants, those loans, those programs at the levels that I talked about at the beginning of this presentation to ease the burden that this pandemic and the pressure that this pandemic has placed on so many. We had about $52.8 million in COVID relief grant and loan programs to support over 3,000 small businesses here in the city and county. Targeted programs, very specific to community. We did it the San Francisco way, tailoring those efforts in the areas where we worked most diligently in the past. And making sure that I'm very proud of creating the first, together with Mayor Breed and the San Francisco Foundation, a very generous donor, the first African-American revolving loan fund here in the city and county that complemented very specific grants to support the opening of shared spaces throughout our communities, to support our immigrant and minority and women-owned businesses, small businesses here in the city and county. addressing property crime to make sure that small businesses during that time had the relief that they needed, and of course, any other storefront relief grants to support them during this time. In addition to that, the city allocated about $17.7 million in direct support to over 18,300 workers and their families. Anything to support small level food security efforts, to help them support them with rent, and also be able to quarantine safely. I think one of the programs that I'm also proud of that we did together with supervisors Ronan, Walton, and Mayor Breed was creating a program to provide minimum wage compensation for members of the community who needed to quarantine, but were at risk of losing the dollars that they could not find elsewhere. No paid sick leave for them. They were not able to access unemployment for a variety of reasons. And we created programs to support them during that time so that they could quarantine safely, again, for the benefit of all of us. And again, back at the beginning, we deferred approximately $46 million in business registration fees for 100,000 businesses, business taxes deferment for about 20,000 businesses, and provided about an additional 19,000 businesses with additional time that equaled around $16 million in fees. Next slide, please. A thing to highlight, again, we're still in the month of May. Sharky Lagawana, Manny Yucatel, formerly of the Small Business Commission, Sharky, the president of the Small Business Commission. I know the president of the Chamber of Commerce, Rodney Fung, has been a huge champion for small businesses. It was a priority for him in some of his first conversations with Mayor Breed to ensure that our small businesses were being supported even before the pandemic. Ever more important now. If you have a choice, don't let convenience get in the way. Please help San Francisco small businesses in any way that you can. Even if you're thinking about gift certificates for when you're going to invite friends or family back to San Francisco, beginning to pay it forward for our small businesses so that they can get their recovery for the benefit of the character of our neighborhoods, for the benefit of the character of our communities. I just attended most recently in Chinatown at one of the traditional banquet halls, an indoor forum that talked about the celebration of the API communities, and we are very, very excited at the efforts there. Please do support our neighborhoods, support your small businesses in any way you can. Forgo the online transactions by extremely large companies. Focus on small business. Take the 30-day small business challenge. I know many of you already have. Please continue to do so. And as you ramp up your efforts about bringing the workforce back to the office, think about those small contractors that you can support as you welcome people back to the office. Next slide, please. So as I was mentioning, our part of reopening, we're getting very excited about opening City Hall to the public, together with the county clerk, together with the treasurer and tax collector in the Office of Small Business, to get us back to work and have us breathing some fresh air with some open doors at City Hall and welcoming the public back in. You can reach us at any time if you're not ready to do that, though. 554-5569. You can find that information on our website, sfassessor.org. Or you can email us as well, and you see that information here, assessor@sfgov.org. And for any records that you may want to access, please do reach out to us at recorder.sfgov.org. Excuse me. Again, it's been a pleasure for us to be able to serve the city and county during the pandemic. And we're very much looking forward to welcoming people back into City Hall, another sign that we are recovering. In addition to the announcements, I know many of you have been following closely, whether it's in investments in a community-centered way to welcome people back to mid-market safely, whether it's investments in our arts and artists and arts organizations, as announced earlier this week, to offset the losses from loss of hotel tax revenue to support the cultural vitality of San Francisco, or whether we talk about arts activation downtown as we welcome visitors back to San Francisco through investments in Halliday Plaza, our gateway to Union Square and downtown, or additional investments for community ambassadors to welcome people back safely and make sure that we are foot forward about taking care of the issues that existed pre-pandemic, that were even more exacerbated during the pandemic, so that we can welcome people back with a smile and confidence post-pandemic as we work our way through this this new time that we're coming into. And with that, I just want to say thank you. And again, thank you very much for having me. I think I got that in the 30 minutes we allotted for the presentation. Stunned. And then Emily, I know you wanted to open it up for some questions, and very happy to answer any that I'm able to.
Great. Thank you so much, Assessor. And yeah, perfect timing. And, on behalf of Rodney, myself, and the entire chamber, thank you so much for all your office is doing for the small business community, and what you're continuing to do for them. Our data actually is also showing that, pre-pandemic numbers, we saw about 50% of our small businesses shutter their doors. We have some updated data, and it's looking like they're slowly returning. It's slowly, but our lines are trending upwards. I'd be interested to hear, how do you and your office feel about, are we nearing the light at the end of the tunnel? Is San Francisco really back for business?
Yeah, San Francisco is back for business, and that's only going to be able to be maintained by very real psychological dynamics that are playing out in addition to the financial ones. The announcements that are being made right now are buoying people's spirits. They're making people feel more comfortable about coming back. I'm already seeing in my neighborhood right now in the Excelsior, people coming back to support their small businesses in a more significant way. Organizations are popping up at small businesses in the Castro and Chinatown to support those businesses. It's those efforts that are making the allowances that we have right now successful from an economic perspective. At the same time, the psychological impacts of being sheltered in place for this period of time, the uncertainty, the whiplash that's been going on, we're seeing consistent positive momentum here in the Bay Area because of the sacrifices so many of you and your friends and your family members have made. That is paying off with this consistent roadway that we're taking advantage of right now. There is absolutely light that we're seeing, but in order for especially our small businesses to feel that, they're very happy about the level of investment, as I was mentioning, the density of investment and focused, specific investment that the federal government is showing, that the state is showing, that we have been showing throughout the pandemic, is really lifting their spirits, and they feel like they're finally being heard, and that they're being respected by the programs that are being developed to benefit them, they and their workers. That is a huge, huge benefit that we cannot take for granted. And I hope everyone feels as I personally do, that the way in which we're getting consistent messaging from the federal government, from the Biden-Harris administration, through all of their cabinet members, that's moving through the Speaker of the House, our representatives here locally, that we are able to build back better, we're able to roar back, as Gavin Newsom is saying. That is our intention, and I think we're seeing that right now.
Wonderful. It's wonderful to have a positive conversation. That's great.
It is. It's even more. I mean, we've been trying throughout this time to say, we're going to get through this together. That was a lot more difficult when we didn't have all of the resources in place across the divisions of government that supported that statement. Now, more than ever before, I feel so proud of what so many government workers have been able to do during this time and stretching themselves. We've all been very blessed to actually have jobs and to be able to maintain those jobs and also be of service at a time when so many people were wondering, what do I do? And we've been very lucky as government workers, as city workers, to be able to lean into this pandemic and serve people from an economic perspective, from a cultural perspective, from a community perspective, from a health perspective, and really feeling we've been part of a cohesive, coherent, expansive solution.
Yeah. Agreed. It's we're in a good city. We're leading the way in our vaccine rates. Our businesses are starting to open back up. So again, thank you and your office for all that you've done. I'll go ahead and open up for some questions. We have a few in the Q&A, so I'll go ahead and start with those. Let's see here. Well, I guess speaking about businesses opening back up, I think we all saw the Hilton downtown receive some of their first guests after a while. I guess on a larger scale, how do you foresee this impacting our city financially with, hotels opening back up, tourists coming back, whether those are, for leisure or business tourists coming in?
I think it's well, the first piece is that we're very grateful for the rapid way in which the hotel industry is ramping back up again and bringing people back to work. I think people have been yearning for that. And that enables us to bring our tourism industry back to San Francisco. It's going to be some time based on the conversations that I've had with some of the economists in terms of the rate at which we're going to start realizing the benefits there. But it's moving, and I think in a positive direction. But that is essential for us. And already the proactive outreach that I know Kate Sophis, as the new director of economic and workforce development, is already taking with her new team, together with the city administrator's office, about ensuring that the tourism industry knows that we are open for business, and also the convention industry, in partnership with SF Travel and all of you, know that we want those conventions to take place here in every way possible, back in San Francisco, and to invite people back so they feel safe from their experience coming through SFO, which is extraordinary, to making their way downtown safely and feeling comfortable about the full spectrum of that experience. I think we've learned the importance of that here in the city, and I want to see that continue.
Definitely. Well, and speaking about, businesses downtown, we have seen some, larger businesses leave us and move on to other, maybe more affordable cities. What do you think the city can do or is doing to help retain our downtown businesses?
I think it's what I mentioned earlier. The announcement that the mayor just made yesterday, together with Karen Flood, helps to address those issues head on. The investments that are being made in mid-market, the headlines that the city is doing something, that resonates not only for people here in San Francisco, but also in the region and nationally. Whenever there's a bad story, that resonates in very significant ways, that detracts people from coming to the city. When you're making announcements about how we want to come back and invite you to Union Square, where we know the stories have not been positive throughout the pandemic, that is a huge benefit for attracting more people to the city and giving them the belief that, hey, it's not just me saying it, read this article, or pointing specifically to the investments that Mayor Breed has been making to support the economic reopening and vitality of downtown. That is important. The feeling of safety that the new ambassadors will provide, whether we talk about the downtown area, that is important, or whether we talk about mid-market, that is important for people to feel safe. And in addition, what is the social impact narrative that we're telling? Those workers, beyond just police officers, those workers through partners like Urban Alchemy or the Downtown Streets team or others, there is a social impact we're making through those workforce programs that show and illustrate that we're not just talking about doing things differently here in the city and county, but we're actually doing them by virtue of supporting financially these types of programs that help us make that social impact. So we're not just part of a trend, we're part of very specific actions that we're taking up and down the spectrum of recovery with an equity and racial equity lens. I think that is equally as important in terms of attracting people back to the city and letting them know they're part of something special. And then finally, what is your gateway experience? Like I talked before about how you come into SFO, which I think we all should feel very proud of, in terms of how we represent ourselves when people first get off those planes and have their experience of the region in San Francisco. In addition, what is their experience when they come out of BART, which is why the mayor made those investments in Halliday, the commitment to make those investments in Halliday Plaza. So there's a different activation going on there that people are welcomed into the city in a different way. And I think that's a great thing for us.
Definitely. I know I'm personally very excited to frequent downtown a bit more myself, especially with all this talk of, art and, all these new dancers coming out and about. And I think it'll be great for our city.
Thanks for mentioning that. I want to give a big shout out to Deborah Cullinan and Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, Amy Cohen at the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and Topie, Laurel Arvaritides, who helped put that together, and all of the other community partners to bring our artists back to work in a creative way. That's the kind of momentum we want to see continued in the city.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think it was a great point that the mayor made yesterday about, making sure our tourists feel welcome. They can come into hotels, and just a lot of the businesses downtown, they are what fuel a lot of the funds for the arts. So really those go hand in hand. So very excited to see that kind of visual representation. Let's see, we have a few other questions here.
One more point on that. That kind of work doesn't just happen.
Mhm.
That kind of work is indicative of the right time and also the right people who've been in place doing this work for years and having an opportunity for that type of approach and that work to expand. And it takes a mayor like Mayor Breed who sees it and welcomes it and invests in it. But our work that we've done together with Mayor Breed, with Mayor Lee in the past, around investing in our neighborhoods and supporting our cultural districts and creating the programs that support they and our legacy businesses, that is all reflected in the new programming that you are seeing right now. And we should feel very proud of that.
Definitely. Agreed. I think that the business community was very pleased to hear her press announcements yesterday. A lot of positive change coming our way.
And it's also a reflective of the advocacy that Rodney Fong has been making in his meetings with the mayor, right? In terms of the importance of small businesses, conversations that he had with me when I was director of OEWD around the small business neighborhood approach he wanted to see us take. And I think it prepared us for a very challenging year. And I think it's played a huge part in how and why we've been successful in the most hellish of times.
Agreed. And I think this investment in downtown core also really shows, now more than ever, I think our residents and business owners alike fully see the ecosystem that San Francisco is, how we all are working together and feeding each other in this 7x7 city that we live in.
And I think that the other level of importance there is, I think many of us, whether we realize it or not, we certainly know it now, have been taking our business communities in the city for granted and have been taking the value that they create for the city, both culturally and economically, for granted as well. Whether we're talking about the role that big business plays in bringing workers downtown to support small businesses, or we're talking about the small businesses in the neighborhoods that they contribute to, and how important they have been for our well-being, and how we miss them when we see their doors boarded up, or we see them closing down. I'm hoping, or the workers that have been impacted as well because of those closures or those impacts. The hope that I have is that people's eyes have been opened in a way as significantly as the racial and civil actions that have taken place over the past year have opened their eyes as well, their hearts and their minds, to continue to understand what it takes for a city to work, what it takes for a city to function, and that includes all aspects of our business community.
Definitely. Couldn't have said it better. That's great. I'll go ahead and ask this question here. I know this has recently come out that this will potentially be vetoed, but Muni, if we were to have a free Muni, if the pilot if it weren't vetoed, if it were successful, how would a free Muni impact our city budget?
That's unclear. That's more of that's more of a conversation with the mayor. I understand the chamber's going to have a conversation with her later on today to get her thoughts directly on the conversation she's having with the board of supervisors around free Muni.
Definitely.
And also making sure, I think one of the positive aspects in the past was the benefit that it provided to youth and seniors in the beginning, right? Of that program back many, many years ago when it was first initiated. But for the more specifics on the conversation that's taking place right now, I think that conversation needs to be had directly with the mayor.
Perfect. Thank you. And then lastly, kind of a more open-ended question. What has your office learned from the pandemic on how to be prepared for disasters in the future?
Oh, wow. That's a very heavy question. The simple answer is, and I'm still learning the intricacies and the culture of the Assessor-Recorder's office, but they're an amazing group of people. And the work that they have made possible, even during this time, in quickly shifting to remote work and being flexible about any condition or circumstance they're placed in, I think everyone is realizing has been an extraordinary benefit, knowing that your workforce can be as flexible as possible. I think speaking further to that around remote work, that the considerations that are being made right now around the infrastructure necessary to sustain it I think that has been one of the big lessons learned in terms of where we're going to find the infrastructure for the realities of what it means to do work in the 21st century and in the second decade of the 21st century. These are the new realities that we're facing, and also the conversations that we're having as a city as a whole right now. Whether I know the conversations that are taking place on the private side to a degree, but certainly on the public side around what makes sense now that we're coming back to work generally related to the pandemic, based on spacing, et cetera, and the realities of who and who is not going to be coming into the office, or who is not going to be visiting City Hall, but also separate and apart from the pandemic, are we ready to start considering the conversations around what remote work can mean for efficiencies that support also a quality of life that many of us want to see enhanced as well, in addition to balancing the productivity that we want to see at the same time. And then I hope that every city employee has realized the benefit of the disaster service worker program, because our COVID command center would not have been possible without the dedicated investment of workers who, in so much uncertainty, sacrificed themselves to come out on the streets, not knowing what was going to happen to themselves or their families in service of others. And I think that what people I hope we're taking away as government workers and as public servants is the power that we have just by virtue of our presence and the action that we can take in communities when you have that city badge card and you're able to approach someone and provide them with an answer to a question that they may not have. And I think even more importantly, the power of honesty and truth and the relief that the statement, "I don't know," can mean for people, especially during a time of such uncertainty. Now, that had its place, and you had to have answers shortly thereafter, if not within seconds. But being honest with people as we were navigating this pandemic, I hope that tone and that tenor continues throughout all city departments as we're doing work in service of the public, because that's why we're here, and I want to see that type of approach continue. I've already seen it throughout this pandemic, but I think that's been a huge lesson for us as well. And that's more on the cultural side than on the technical side, but equally as important.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that this pandemic has really created a lot of community leaders as well, and inspired a lot more unity around, particular issues and even industries that maybe weren't as vocal as before. So definitely, I think that cultural aspect is just as important. Before we close, do you have any?
One last thing. The establishment of an equity team within the COVID Command Center was essential in meeting the needs that we saw disproportionately impacting communities of color in San Francisco, vulnerable communities in San Francisco, seniors, those with disabilities, and others. The lesson that's been learned through this process is how important operationally, from a civic engagement and civic responsibility perspective, that work has been. The organizations that have been set up, the community-centered, community-guided, community-informed. I know we use that word a lot here in San Francisco or anywhere. I hope people understand the meaning of it now. It certainly has taken a different level of resonance for me to be able to see what that means when you know you can walk down the street, and when Walgreens can't serve you, or when a CVS can't serve you, or your own healthcare provider can't serve you, to a degree, you know that community was thinking about those gaps in service that a large system can't always address, to make sure that community-centered opportunities are being created for our people. And that also helped create open access pathways for people to feel safe and comfortable in visiting, say, a city testing site, a community-run city testing site, a community test to care program for wraparound services, or a vaccination site like the one that exists a few blocks away in my neighborhood, set up by the Latino Task Force. The same kind of sites were existing in other parts of the city to serve our API communities, to serve our Black communities, and ensuring that the resistance that people might have had for a variety of reasons, based on government mistrust, general mistrust of a vaccine, or disinformation, could be served in a street community level way so that our city could be safe and could recover. That approach is not a talking point. It's not a feeling. It's an absolute operational necessity to maintain in any future disaster that we face. That has to be how we begin to ensure that the numbers that we've seen, not only in the state, not only in the city, but nationally, in terms of the disproportionate impact on communities, we know so much more now than we ever did before from an operational standpoint. And that is extraordinarily valuable for the issues, the people, and the principles that we as San Franciscans, as people of service, hold dear. It's why we're here in the Bay Area. It informs our philanthropic approaches as well, and certainly our emergency responses too.
Wonderful point. Yeah, I think that's a source of pride for many San Franciscans, and that community focus is truly what got us to the yellow tier, and what's getting our communities vaccinated and keeping us all safe.
And where there's resistance, where there's a stubbornness in those data points moving in a positive direction, it will be the community approach that changes that.
Right, definitely. Do you have any last words to leave us with? I know you've imparted a lot on us already.
I'm just very proud of everything that we've done together. I'm very proud of the advocacy. I hope it continues. I hope that as we as a city and the chamber continue to partner together, that we're keeping our economic recovery first and foremost in our minds, and that we continue to be solution oriented together. I think that's what's driven the success of our recovery and our relief programs, is the focus on where's a need, what can we do together to invest, and how do we develop a solution and infrastructure that helps make those solutions viable for a great community, cultural, and economic impact. And so thank you to all of you for everything you've done throughout this pandemic. Whether you feel you have or not, I know that you have contributed in making our city a better place to live during the pandemic and in the future.
Thank you so much, Assessor. It's been an honor to have you. And again, thank you on behalf of the chamber and all the businesses we represent for all that you do, as well as what your office is doing to help support the entire San Francisco community.
I want to give a shout out to my public affairs team, Adam Mayes, Holly Lung, Tina Rose Novero, and Kenneth Chen for all the work that they're doing in supporting me as we're ramping up our efforts to engage. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions at all, or if there's a more specific presentation that you would like us to bring to you or to any of your stakeholders. Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. All right. I think I'll go ahead and close us out now. Let's see, I think we have a final slide here. Wonderful. So thank you all for joining us and for all those questions. Would love for all of you to join us for more chamber events. We have a few exciting ones coming up in the next few months. On June 4th, we have an executive coffee break. On June 24th, we have our City Beat breakfast. This is an exciting event that we have every year. It's one you do not want to miss. So be sure to sign up for that one. July 27th, we have an SF Chamber member mixer. On the 14th, we have our Bay Area Sports Hall of Fame entertainment gala. And then we also have on October 28th, our 30th annual Excellence in Business Awards. So some very exciting events that are coming up that you should all be sure to sign up for. And again, thank you to all of our sponsors for helping us put on this event every month. We have our title sponsor, Waymo, BlackRock, Safeway, Kaiser, and Delta. So again, thank you, Assessor, and your office for joining us, and thank you everyone for attending. Have a great day.
Bye.